He learned the sound of war long before he learned the sound of his own name. From his perch atop the shattered basalt cliffs, he listened as the world below cracked and burned. Steel rang against steel, cities cried out in smoke, and the ground trembled beneath the endless march of armies. Once, a very long time ago, those sounds stirred something fierce in him. Dragons, the old story said, were born of fire and conflict. But centuries of watching the same pointless hatred repeat itself had worn his fire thin. He was called Ashiel, though no living soul remembered it now. He was old, so very old, old enough to remember when the valleys were green and the rivers ran clear, when humans would look up at the sky not in fear, but in pure wonder. Back then, he had flown openly, his scales catching the sun like a shower of molten gold. Children had pointed in awe, artists had painted his likeness, kings had bowed in respect, but admiration, he learned, had a way of curdling into suspicion, and suspicion always found a way to turn into blame. When the wars came, as they always did, there was always a reason to hunt a dragon. So Ashiel withdrew. He climbed higher, hid deeper in the mountains, and told himself that solitude was the only true safety. But loneliness isn't silence, it's an echo. Every scream from the battlefields below found its way to him. Every burning village reflected in his memories like a distorted, painful mirror. He tried to convince himself the wars were not his concern, that the age of dragons had passed. Yet, when his wings twitched at the faint scent of smoke on the wind, he knew he was lying to himself. One night, as ash fell like black snow, Ashiel heard something different. It wasn't the roar of armies, but a single, broken sob, drifting up the cliffside, so fragile and out of place in the chaos. Against his better judgment, the ancient dragon descended. At the base of the cliffs lay the ruins of a watchtower, its stones cracked by siege fire. And there, beneath a collapsed wall, crouched a human child, no more than 10 winters old, clutching a torn banner. Her small face was streaked with soot and tears, her breath coming in sharp, terrified gasps. When Ashiel emerged from the shadows, the ground trembled with his mass. The child looked up and she did not run. She just stared, her eyes wide, and whispered, "Are you going to burn me too?" The question pierced him deeper than any spear ever could. Ashiel lowered his massive head until one of his ember-bright eyes met her gaze. "No," he rumbled, surprised by how gentle his own voice sounded. "I am tired of burning." The child's shoulders shook with a fresh wave of grief. Everyone else isn't. And so, Ashiel stayed. He shielded her from the biting cold with one of his great wings. When soldiers passed nearby, he remained perfectly still, a mountain of scales hidden among the ruins. At dawn, he carefully carried her beyond the war's edge, to a valley the flames had not yet touched. When he gently set her down, she reached out and pressed her small hand against his scale. "It's warm," she said, a hint of wonder in her voice. "But it doesn't hurt." Neither did the strange new feeling in his chest, though it frightened him more than any army ever had. After that day, Ashiel began to move again, not as a weapon, but as a witness. He guided refugees through treacherous, broken passes, his enormous shadow hiding them from enemy patrols. He melted fallen swords into plowshares for farmers who were too weary to fight anymore. When rival armies met beneath his circling form in the sky, they would hesitate, and sometimes that hesitation was long enough for them to talk instead of fight. He did not end the war. No single dragon could erase human cruelty, but in the places where his wings had passed, the fighting softened, if only for a moment, and slowly, something deep within Ashiel began to ease. Peace, he finally learned, was not the absence of fire. It was the choice of how to use it. Years later, when the wars finally burned themselves out, Ashiel returned to his cliffs. The world was scarred, but it was breathing again. Green grass crept back through the cracked stone. Children flew kites where banners of war once stood. Ashiel curled himself atop the basalt and watched the sunrise. For the first time in centuries, the silence did not echo with ghosts of the past. He was still alone, but he was no longer lonely. And in a world that had nearly forgotten gentleness, that was more than enough. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please consider liking and subscribing for more. It means the world.